It's 1 year since Russia invaded Ukraine. Described as one of the most aggressive military acts seen in Europe since World War II, the military invasion of Ukraine on Thursday, February 24, 2022, has had far more consequences than expected. Ukraine and Russia are among the world's main suppliers of agri-food commodities, particularly grains and oils. Together, they provide over 30% of world trade in wheat, 32% for barley, 17% for corn, and over 50% of sunflower oils, seeds, and meals. Many emerging or vulnerable economies rely on these supplies for their food security, especially in the Middle East and Africa. Russia is the world's third largest oil producer, the second largest natural gas producer, and among the top 5 producers of steel, nickel, and aluminium. It is also the largest wheat exporter in the world, accounting for almost 20% of global trade. Ukraine is the 6th largest producer of corn, 7th for wheat production, and 1st for sunflowers. It is among the top 10 producers of sugar beets, barley, soya, and rapeseed. Coupled with the sanctions imposed on Russia, the invasion has had a huge effect on international trade. Effects range from a shortage of food products, raw materials, and components to cancelled trade routes, changes in demand, and price increases.
So once the war started, we had a lot of interruptions, and one of them was economic. And the war interrupted a lot of supply chains, global supply chains. And unfortunately, it hit 2 areas that really matter to all of us. One of them was food, the other one was energy. We've suddenly realized how dependent we are on Ukraine for food and also for energy. Ukraine might not have been producing a lot of energy, but the routes, the supply chains were disrupted. So what has happened in most of the world, in most of the countries, including Kenya or I don't know about Nigeria, that the price of food has gone up and the price of energy has gone up. So that has led to inflation. And the countries have been doing all they can to stop that inflation. We have seen interest rates going up in the US, in Western Europe, in Australia, and even in Kenya, and I guess in Nigeria. And when interest rates go up, what happens is that people don't borrow the money. And if people don't borrow the money, then the economy does not grow as fast as expected. So you don't need to be in Ukraine, you don't need to be in Russia to feel the economic effect of this war.
From a trade perspective, the biggest consequence of the war is the rise in commodity prices. The war affected 3 main categories of commodities: energy, agriculture, and metals. The considerable price increases affect international supply chains and markets. The result was higher inflation rates globally. In Africa, the war in Ukraine disrupted Africa's promising recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic by raising food and fuel prices, disrupting the trade of goods and services, tightening the fiscal space, constraining green transitions, and reducing the flow of development finance in the continent.
I have seen that in my own life, in my own country. I've seen people complaining about the prices of basic commodities. In fact, in the last 1 or 2 months, some politicians have been leading a demonstration in the streets of Nairobi. I think the government must bring down the price of basic commodities, mostly food and energy. We have felt the effect of that war, whether we are rich or whether we are poor, wherever we are.
Being the world's 3rd highest exporter of crude oil after the United States and Saudi Arabia, it is not surprising that Russia's invasion of Ukraine has had implications on Africa's fuel security. The disruption of oil prices further exacerbated the cost of food production in Africa.
This war goes far beyond Ukraine. It is also an assault on the world's most vulnerable people and countries. While war reigns over Ukraine, a sword of Damocles hangs over the global economy, especially in the developing world. Food, fuel, and fertilizer prices are skyrocketing. Supply chains are being disrupted, and the costs and delays of transportation of imported goods, when available, are at record levels. And all of this is hitting the poorest, the hardest, and planting the seeds for political instability and unrest around the globe.
Although oil prices were rising globally before the full escalation of the war, however, when Russia attacked Ukraine, the price of crude oil in the global market skyrocketed from around $76 per barrel at the start of January 2022 to over $130 per barrel in March.
Ukraine war, which has been around for about a year now, has been largely negative on most part of the world. But for oil companies and oil-producing countries, a lot of them have reaped huge benefits during this time. And that has to do with the fact that at some point at the heart of this crisis, oil price went as much as $120 a barrel, which is something we have not seen for almost a decade in oil price. So for those countries that were ready and are able to meet their quota, they made money, huge money.
The war presented an opportunity for some African commodities producers. Countries like South Africa experienced a commodities boom, while Africa's largest economy, Nigeria, was unable to take advantage of their situation.
A few countries, maybe like Nigeria, who had suffered greatly during this period. We have seen our production crash from an all-time high of 2.5 million barrels per day, sometimes in 2005 November, to 936,000 barrels per day. And that was not good. So for Nigeria, we were not able to maximize the opportunities that war presented. That's the way it has been.
Many have said that this is yet another situation where African countries must draw lessons from. Coming out of the COVID-19 pandemic, the continent saw millions more people pushed into poverty and economic and development gains of the past 2 decades reversed. But with a food shortage and increase in prices, as well as increase in cost of living, the Ukraine war has made Africa's economic recovery much more difficult. So, what should Africa take away from what has been a very painful experience?
In terms of energy, I expect Africa to focus more on renewable energies, not more energy in geothermal, more energy from wind, more energy from solar, so that if there is such a disruption, we are able to handle it. We are less affected.
Well, the lessons for African nation is that we have to be on top of our games and understand geopolitics for what it is. Some of what is going on now it involves a lot of international politics that I don't think we have been very good at. We are always on the receiving end, that those countries that would like to just receive aid instead of being able to sit at the table and negotiate our ways. The mono-dependence is a major problem. Africa is blessed. If you take a country like Nigeria, the question is, after all these years, since Oloibiri in the 60s, we are still 90% dependent on oil for our foreign exchange. Why should it be so? What are we doing about diversification of the economic base of this country?
Just a day before the 1-year anniversary of the war, the United Nations General Assembly adopted a resolution calling for a just and lasting peace. The resolution passed 141 in favor, with 7, including Russia, opposing it. China and India were among the major assentations. On Friday, February 24, 2023, Britain announced an export ban on every item Russia has used on the battlefield. There will be internationally coordinated sanctions and trade measures that would target aircraft parts, radio equipment, and electronic components. The sanctions will also target more Russian executives. 1 year later, the war rages on. There have been wins and losses on both sides of the battlefront. International players have continued to position themselves on the chessboard of global geopolitics, while Africa has deeply felt the impact of a war that it is not part of. As many worry about the growing trend of deglobalization and the continued fallout from the war in Ukraine, others are using these situations to call for Africa to strengthen intracontinental trade and work to better protect itself from external shocks. Perpetua Fasanmi-Peter for News Central.